It began not with a scream, but with the sound of a pen scratching against a legal pad in an empty, multi-million-dollar farmhouse. A sound so soft, so unnervingly quiet, it was almost swallowed by the vastness of the Oregon sky pressing against the windows. To the outside world, the rolling acres of Roloff farms had always represented a fairy tale, a kingdom of pumpkins, wedding arches, and the triumphant spirit of a family who turned their differences into a global television phenomenon. But fairy tales, by their very definition, require a delicate suspension of disbelief. And on a cold, gray morning that the cameras never filmed, the fairy tale shattered. The news didn't leak through a glossy magazine or a carefully crafted press release designed to soften the blow. It erupted through the quiet hum of the digital gossip machine, a seismic shockwave that stopped longtime fans mid-scroll. Split heartbreaking. Amy leaves. The words felt like a glitch in the matrix, a typo that had to be corrected. Because this wasn't just any couple. This was Amy and Chris Marek. This was the second chapter, the redemption arc, the proof that love could bloom wildly and beautifully after 50. To learn that it had decayed so completely, so silently behind closed doors, forces us to go back and look at the footage we thought we knew, to search for the shadows hiding in the sunlight of their wedding day. We are talking, of course, about the final, agonizing unraveling of a bond that was supposed to be unbreakable. It is a dissolution that carries a staggering weight, not just emotionally, but financially, with whispers of a $2.5 million betrayal that severed the trust at the root. This is the story of why the laughter stopped echoing in the kitchen, why Chris Marek moved out from the very farm he had fought so hard to integrate into, and why Amy Roloff had to make the heartbreaking decision to walk away from a marriage she once described as her miracle. It's a narrative that forces us to confront a deeply uncomfortable truth, that sometimes the person who helps you heal from a past wound is the one who inadvertently opens a new, deeper one. As we sit here today, with the dust settling on the legal documents and the fan base reeling in collective grief, we must dissect a reality that is far more complex than a simple fight over dirty dishes or television editing. This is a cautionary tale of identity, of soil, of a watch, and of a betrayal so profound it rendered reconciliation impossible. To understand the sheer magnitude of this fracture, we must first travel back to the emotional landscape Amy inhabited before Chris ever walked through the door. For nearly 3 decades, Amy Roloff was the emotional anchor of Little People, Big World, a matriarch operating inside a marriage that often felt like a slow, public erosion of her spirit. Her life with Matt Roloff was a crucible of high-stakes entrepreneurship and low-blow conflict. Viewers didn't just watch their marriage dissolve, they felt it. They felt the weight of Amy's loneliness in the messy chaos of her corner of the house, a deliberate contrast to Matt's meticulously organized, sterile renovation projects. That divorce, when it was finalized, wasn't a shock. It was a collective exhale, a release of pressure that had been building for decades. When Amy moved off the farm, settling into a beautiful but conventional suburban home, it appeared as though she was shrinking her world to find peace. And then, like a plot twist written by a benevolent screenwriter, Chris Marek entered stage left. He wasn't a television personality. He was a real estate agent. He was tall, calm, steady, and seemingly utterly unfazed by the circus that follows reality television royalty. From their first blind date, orchestrated through friends, the chemistry was palpable because it wasn't based on adrenaline. It was based on quiet companionship. He looked at Amy not as a star or a little person, but as a woman he wanted to ride motorcycles with and share a bottle of wine with as the sun went down. That is the version of Chris Marek that the audience fell in love with. He was the anti-Matt. Where Matt was frantic, Chris was still. Where Matt was scheming to build medieval castles, Chris was content to grill a steak and watch the sunset. It was the safety Amy had craved for her entire adult life. When he got down on one knee, a full year after they had started dating, the collective joy from the fan base was deafening. This was the happy ending. The wedding, broadcast as a special event on the very network that had documented her first marriage's slow death, was a spectacle of vindication. Amy, in a white dress, beaming with a radiance that erased 20 years of stress, walking toward a man who promised tranquility. But here lies the fatal flaw that nobody saw in the confetti-dusted glow of the reception. Chris wasn't just marrying Amy, he was marrying the legacy of Roloff Farms. He was moving into a narrative that had been written by Matt Roloff decades before he arrived. The early days of their marriage were an Instagram highlight reel of second chance bliss. Motorcycle trips, cozy winters in the new house, and Chris seamlessly blending into the chaotic, noisy fabric of the Roloff extended family. He was the fun stepdad figure, the easygoing guy who could share a beer with Zach or talk cars with Jeremy. He wasn't competing with the past. He was gently overriding it with new, happier memories. But as the honeymoon phase lingered and subsided, the practical machinery of a blended life began to grind. The noise of the farm never really stops. Even when you don't live in the big house, the gravitational pull of Roloff Farms is a force of nature. It's a character in the story, a living, breathing entity that demands constant attention, constant negotiation, and constant boundary setting. This is where the microscope comes in, and where the story takes a sharp turn down a road rarely explored. We often talk about love languages as words of affirmation or acts of service. But for Amy Roloff, the language of security had always been property. Her fight for her home during her divorce from Matt was existential. She had been displaced. So when Chris proposed, there was a tacit understanding that they would build a space that was theirs. They did just that, moving into a stunning, freshly built home just a stone's throw from the farm where she spent decades. It was supposed to be their fortress of solitude. However, tranquility for one person can feel like exile to another. Chris is a social, active, and gregarious man. He didn't sign up for a quiet, sedentary retirement. He signed up for sunset rides, golf trips with the guys, and spontaneous barbecues. What happens when the adventure guy feels his world getting smaller, dictated by the filming schedule and the complexities of family politics? The show, Little People, Big World, had always thrived on conflict. But now, the source of that conflict was shifting. It wasn't Amy versus Matt anymore. The saga of the farm sale had already drawn those battle lines. The new, more uncomfortable dynamic was the triangulation between Amy, Chris, and Matt. Chris found himself in an impossible position. He was living in a home paid for by Amy's empire, an empire Matt built. He was golfing with Matt, working around the farm with Matt, yet sleeping in a house where Matt's name was often a trigger for anxiety. The fan base began to notice the micro-expressions, the fleeting moments editors can't cut away from fast enough. Amy would bristle slightly when Chris returned from a long, leisurely afternoon with Matt. There was a subtle, unspoken accusation in the air. Whose side are you on? To Amy, loyalty was absolute. Having lived through what she perceived as years of Matt's strategic maneuvers against her, Chris's insistence on being Switzerland was not peacemaking. It was betrayal by neutrality. It's time we talk about the nature of reality television editing, but in reverse. Usually, editors amplify drama that doesn't exist. In this case, we believe the editing was desperately trying to hide the drama that was festering just off-screen. You could see it in the confessional interviews. Amy, a woman who has always worn her heart on her sleeve, started using the word we less and I more. Chris, the master of the relaxed grin, started looking trapped. His smile didn't reach his eyes anymore. He began speaking in the careful, measured tones of a hostage negotiator rather than a husband. The issue that broke the camel's back, the catalyst that turned a slow drift into a catastrophic implosion, was, as always, the farm. It wasn't just a piece of land. It was the $2.5 million question. The North Farm acreage, the untouched, raw land that had been a source of blood and tears for the Roloff siblings, became the third person in Chris and Amy's bed. When negotiations for the siblings to buy the land fell apart, it was a public heartbreak. But privately, it created a terrifying void. What was the future of this land? And more importantly, what was the future of the grand estate Matt still controlled? The whispers in the industry, the deep rumors that we are now piecing together from close production sources, suggest that Chris began to view his future not just through the lens of a husband, but through the lens of a man who had worked in real estate for decades. He saw the potential for a massive financial windfall that had nothing to do with Amy's emotional attachment to the soil. This is where the narrative pivots from sadness to stark, unforgiving shock. The $2.5 million betrayal. It's a number that hangs in the air like a fog, and we need to treat it with the gravity it deserves while maintaining that this is the dark speculation that shattered the marriage. It doesn't refer to a simple theft, a wire transfer moved in the dead of night. It refers to value. The value of the Roloff legacy. According to financial insiders and the deep chatter among those familiar with the couple's legal proceedings, Chris realized the full liquidity of his position. He was a legal spouse in a state with equitable distribution laws. The farm, despite Matt living in the main house, was a web of LLCs, trusts, and legacy planning documents that had been torn up and rewritten over the years. But Amy's stake, the vast fortune she had accumulated and negotiated, was now partially tied to a man named Chris Marek. The devastating theory that caused Amy to physically recoil, is that Chris began dealing for the future without her. The idea was a massive buyout scenario. In a desperate attempt to resolve the farm succession crisis, a tentative, back-channel offer was allegedly explored, a lump sum of $2.5 million to pave the way for a clean consolidation of the property, likely in exchange for a complete severance of Amy's remaining emotional and logistical claims. The betrayal wasn't just that Chris knew about the talks. The betrayal was that he was allegedly positioning himself to profit from the dissolution of her legacy. The rumor suggests Chris viewed the farm, the sacred ground where Amy raised her children, buried her pets, and watered the grass with her tears, as a distressed asset. He saw the exit strategy, not the history. When Amy discovered the extent of the financial positioning, the private meetings that had taken place between Chris and business managers without her knowledge, the fragile trust shattered like a dropped ceramic pumpkin. Imagine the coldness of that realization. You spend 25 years fighting a man to retain your dignity and your half of a kingdom. You finally escape. You finally heal. And you fall in love with a man who you think sees the world in sunsets, not spreadsheets. And then you find a document, or hear a recording, or have a lawyer inform you that your new husband, your safe place, has been negotiating the liquidation of your family's heartache for a price tag of $2.5 million. It is a narrative so painful because it echoes her past trauma with an almost sickening symmetry. With Matt, it was the big house and the kitchen island. With Chris, it was the land and the buyout clause. The fights that followed in the modern farmhouse were not the petty bickering of a long-married couple. They were the devastating, guttural arguments of a woman realizing she had been deeply, spiritually outmaneuvered again. Amy, known for her voice cracking under emotional pressure, reportedly went silent. Those who know her say that her silence is more terrifying than her volume. She stopped negotiating. She stopped explaining. She withdrew the warmth that had been Chris Marek's entire world. He allegedly tried to walk it back, to claim it was a misunderstanding, that he was merely protecting their financial future against the volatility of the family feud. But the damage was done. He hadn't protected her. He had partnered with the very mechanism that was trying to erase her story from the land. He had become, in her eyes, a financial opportunist rather than a life partner. This discovery triggered the physical separation long before the announcement. Keen-eyed viewers of the show's recent season noticed the geography of the heartbreak. Amy was increasingly filmed doing things alone. Chris is on a golf trip, she would say, her smile tight. Chris is visiting friends. The house they built for new beginnings became a massive, echoing reminder of a promise broken. Chris's motorcycle sat in the garage more often, gathering a thin film of dust. The whispers of a betrayal also filtered through the family grapevine with explosive consequences. The Roloff children, fiercely protective of their mother after watching her suffer through the first divorce, circled the wagons. Zach, who had his own very public and painful land battle with Matt, saw Chris's maneuvering as an unforgivable act of disloyalty. It wasn't just a financial scheme, it felt like a hostile takeover. In the court of family opinion, Chris was no longer the cool stepdad who loved a good IPA. He was an outsider who had breached the perimeter. This created an impossible living situation for Amy. She was caught between a husband who had betrayed her trust and children who demanded she scorch the earth. Split heartbreaking. Amy leaves. The title isn't metaphorical. She is the one who had to pull the trigger. Amy, who spent a lifetime trying to hold a crumbling marriage together for the cameras, had to make the decision to end this one to save what was left of her self-worth. It was an exit from a trap, not a departure from a marriage. The love had been replaced by a forensic accounting of trust. Every sweet word, every motorcycle ride, every kiss was reevaluated in the harsh light of that $2.5 million question mark. Did he ever love her, or did he love the proximity to the Roloff brand? We must now enter the domain of pure psychology, a space the cameras can't reach. The agony of the Amy Leaves narrative is that she had to leave a house she designed for happiness. She had to go back to square one. Imagine the packing. Imagine the separation of the assets they had so joyfully merged just a few short years ago. The wedding china, the photographs from the trips to Arizona and the motorcycle rallies, the cozy throws they'd curl up under to watch the sunset. Every object had been tainted by the suspicion of malfeasance. For Chris, the loss is a different kind of tragedy. It is the tragedy of the man who flew too close to the sun. By all accounts, Chris did love Amy. The chemistry was not manufactured. But what is love without trust? It's merely a dangerous illusion. Chris Marek, the relaxed, funny, steady real estate agent, got caught up in the gravity of the big money. He stopped seeing the 100-acre wood for the individual tree lots. He began to view the dysfunction of the Roloff family not as a heartbreaking emotional saga that was tormenting his wife, but as a liquidity event. When you fall in love with a public figure, you inherit their history, but you are not allowed to monetize their trauma without their consent. That is the cardinal sin Chris allegedly committed. And once that line is crossed, the tall, calm guy becomes a stranger. His face becomes unreadable. His easygoing nature becomes a mask for a man who is simply in over his head, exposed for playing a game he didn't understand. What does the future hold for the Roloff empire now? The split fundamentally redraws the power map. Amy, free from the emotional entanglement of a second failed marriage, is likely to become more fiercely independent, perhaps finally writing the unfiltered memoir the world has been waiting for. The farm, that relentless, hungry piece of earth, claims another victim. It swallowed Matt and Amy's marriage. It swallowed the sibling relationships. And now, it has swallowed Amy's attempt at a second act. It's as if the land itself demands a sacrifice, a pound of flesh for every pumpkin harvested. The story of Chris and Amy is a mirror reflecting the unglamorous truth that not all love ends with a slamming door. Some love ends with the quiet signing of a dissolution agreement, the realization that the person across the table was playing Monopoly while you were playing house. The heartbreak is not a loud cry. It is the silent, internal devastation of realizing your partner saw your life's greatest emotional battleground as an investment opportunity. You can forgive harsh words. You can forgive a forgotten anniversary. You cannot forgive the commodification of your heartache. As we close this painful chapter of the Little People, Big World saga, we are left staring at the ruins of a wedding that gave millions of viewers hope. We must remember that the human soul is not a property deed. You cannot survey it, divide it, or sell it off in parcels. The $2.5 million, whether a concrete offer or a speculated backdoor figure, became the symbol of a spiritual chasm too wide to bridge. For Amy, leaving wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of preservation. She refused to be a minority shareholder in a marriage. She refused to be managed. She is the matriarch, not the asset. And as the Oregon rain washes over the empty new house they once shared, the silence inside speaks louder than any confessional interview ever could. This has been an emotional, complicated, and tragically human unraveling. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to walk away from something beautiful because the foundation was built on lies, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. These are real people with real pain, and your respectful engagement means the world. Please like and subscribe to stay with us as we continue to follow this developing, heartbreaking fallout. The silence that followed the signing of the separation papers was not one of relief, but a haunting, cavernous emptiness that settled deep into the bones of the Oregon hills. In the weeks after the news broke, the public narrative fractured into the inevitable chaos of sides and speculation, but the reality inside the two separate residences was a masterclass in solitary grief. For Amy, the immediate aftermath was less about anger and more about a profound, dizzying disorientation. She had walked this path before. She knew the weight of a ring removed, the phantom limb sensation of reaching across the bed in the morning only to find cold, undisturbed sheets. But there is a unique cruelty in experiencing this amputation a second time, later in life, when the promise of a soft landing into old age has been violently ripped away. She had sold her suburban sanctuary to build the new dream house with Chris, a house that now echoed with the ghost of a marriage that had expired with shocking speed. Every corner of that open-concept floor plan was a crime scene of broken promises. The kitchen island where they had clinked wine glasses was now a solitary station for a single coffee cup. The expansive windows that framed the breathtaking sunsets they had built their entire brand around now seemed to frame a void, a panoramic reminder that she was watching the beauty of the world alone again. What makes the Amy Leaves narrative so viscerally different from her first divorce is the element of surprise as a form of trauma. When she left Matt, the world had watched the decay in slow motion for a decade. There was a grim, predictable inevitability to it, a long runway that allowed her to emotionally prepare for impact. This time, there was no runway. This time, the plane simply fell out of the sky. The psychological whiplash of transitioning from newlywed bliss to financial betrayal in what felt like a narrative snap of the fingers sent Amy spiraling into a very private, very dark period of introspection. Friends of the former couple, speaking under conditions of strict anonymity, have painted a picture of a woman who stopped recognizing her own judgment. Amy Roloff, the powerhouse who managed a chaotic household of 4 children, a turbulent television production, and a multi-million-dollar business, began to question her fundamental ability to read human beings. She had welcomed Chris into the deepest, most fragile chambers of her heart. She had given him the ultimate gift, her vulnerability after decades of building fortifications around it. To feel that this sacred offering was commodified, that the man who held her during her moments of anxiety about the farm's future was allegedly scheming to profit from that very anxiety, caused a fracture not just in her marriage, but in her sense of reality. Was the comfort ever real? Was the safety an illusion? These are the questions that don't just break hearts, they break spirits. The immediate logistical reality was a nightmare of dividing the indivisible. On paper, a divorce is a dissolution of assets. In practice, for a couple of their age and integrated lifestyle, it was a vivisection of a shared soul. The blended family gatherings, once a boisterous and healing balm, became a diplomatic minefield. Chris had formed genuine, deep bonds with Amy's children, particularly with Zach and Tori, who had championed him as the good guy, so starkly different from the high-conflict personality of Matt Roloff. The grandchildren had fallen in love with Grandpa Chris, the tall, silly man who gave the best piggyback rides and never complained about the noise.